Hey, shalom everybody. How you doing? Sorry I couldn't be there in school today, and I hope you're all having a good day by now. I want to thank Rabbi for bringing together the ninth and 10th grade classes today. If that didn't happen, I know that was her original intent, but hopefully you're all together. And so I thought instead of being absent, I would record a one-period class for today as we continue talking about the opposite of humility, which we did in the last several weeks. But in the last couple of weeks or so, we've been talking about the opposite of humility, which is arrogance, to be arrogant, to be excessively prideful, to be, is a word, haughty, 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 or having like a really big ego, being full of yourself. And we said that the Hebrew word for that is ga'ava. Ga'ava is to be arrogant, to be just totally enamored with yourself. It's different than confidence. Confidence means that you know you do things well, and you're confident that you can repeat those things well, and you're happy that people recognize that you do things well. It's how we carry that confidence. How do we deal with that confidence? Do we kind of push our confidence in ourselves in everybody else's face? And that confidence can easily become arrogance or pride, excessive pride, or a overstuffed ego, which sounds like something from a menu, doesn't it? Yeah, I think I'll have the overstuffed ego, please, with fries. Any case, so we talked the last couple of weeks about what kinds of things in a person's life could make them arrogant, could make them feel like they are more important than other people and constantly push that in everybody's face. So we mentioned a few things. For example, like if you're very rich, you could become arrogant. Not necessarily, but you could. You could become very arrogant because you're very rich, and your ego could be very, very full of yourself because you're very, very rich. And if you're rich, you may feel entitled to feel better than everybody else. People who are famous could have a big ego. They could become very arrogant because of their fame. Everybody knows them. Everybody's heard their name. They don't necessarily become arrogant, but they could become. People who are talented, singers, dancers, musicians, actors, actresses, people who are very talented can often have a very oversized ego. They get applause all the time. People love what they do. They post about them. The world knows about them, and you can have a very, very full image of yourself and become very arrogant and haughty. Not necessarily become haughty or arrogant, but you could become that way. If you're very smart, people who are very smart could have a good chance of having a very overstuffed ego. Because you're smart, you know so many things, you know more things than perhaps the average person. You have a specialty area that you know about that very few other people know about, and your ego could be huge. You might not be able to enter a room through the doorway because there's not enough room for your ego to pop into that room. People who win awards for different things, it could be sports, athletics, whatever. People who are award winning can become very, very arrogant because they're recognized in many, many different areas and different fields. People who are beautiful, handsome people can become very, very arrogant. I'm surprised that I have not yet become arrogant, given my stunning good looks, slay. Yeah, so people like that can become very, very arrogant and very conceited, feeling that they're better than others. And this is what the Torah tries to warn us against being arrogant, against being so puffy and full of ourselves that we push it into everybody's face. Successful people, successful at different things, can become also very, very arrogant. Uh, so hopefully you all have the handout. It's a 2-page handout. It says from the week of November 27th, that's when we started. And But here we are today on the 14th of December. And let's take so if you look at your handout, the first page, it says number 1, our lessons coming up are all about arrogance, pride, haughtiness, etc. Number 2, I think we did this in both classes, 9 and 10. Let's think of reasons, factors in a person's life that could make a person arrogant. And we've spent the last 5 minutes talking about that. Number 3, I think we have not yet done with 9th and 10th grade. We may yet do it, but we're not going to do that today. So now you'll see between 3 and 4, it says some Jewish thoughts and lessons on arrogance and how to avoid it. And again, Hashem, God, the Torah, wants us to be very, very careful about not crossing the boundary between confidence, knowing the things that we do well, being happy with them, having a lot of pride in it. But there's a line that we can cross to be overly prideful, overly egotistic, and that's what the Torah warns us about. And at the end of today's lesson, we'll learn, especially in the 10th grade, because we touched on this in the 9th grade, we'll learn how to overcome that kind of an arrogance. So number 4, the Midrash. The people of Israel, meaning the Jewish people, is compared to a vine of grapes. What does that mean? To teach us that just as a vine has large and small clusters of grapes, if you've ever seen it, you'll know that there are bigger clusters, smaller clusters. You'll also see it in the supermarket, in your makolet, if they're selling grapes. There's, big chunks and smaller chunks. So the Midrash wants to say why were clusters of grapes created that way? To teach us that just as a vine has large and small clusters of grapes, and the large ones hanging lower than the small ones, why do the large ones hang lower? So should the Jewish people try to be. The greater the person, the greater the cluster of grapes. A large cluster of grapes has a lot of grapes that make it weighed down. So it weighs down in the vine. And the smaller clusters of grapes don't weigh down in the vine as much because they're smaller. So what does it mean? The greater the person, which means the larger the cluster of grapes, the greater should be his or her humility. That means that if we've been given a lot, if Hashem has given us a lot to be prideful about, He's given us talent, He's given us riches, He's given us fame, He's given us smarts, He's given us so many different things that we can celebrate and be happy about ourselves. God has given us so many gifts. It's like having a large cluster of grapes. But the same way that the cluster of grapes hangs low because it's so heavy, those of us who are heavy with gifts from God should also hang low, meaning we should be more humble about these gifts than we should be arrogant about these gifts. I think it's a very nice image. So now every time I see a cluster of grapes, I think of this lesson actually. I see a large cluster of grapes and it reminds me to be humble. To be humble. The more we've been given, the more humble we ought to be about it, like a big cluster of grapes. So I think I love that lesson. The first time I read it, I said, wow, that's really cool. I like that. Take a look at number 5. Talmud, the Talmud. 2,711 pages of the Talmud. Takes 7.5 years to complete it if you study just one page a day. One opinion on these 2,711 pages in the Talmud says the divine presence, God's concentrated presence, cries over one who is haughty or arrogant. In other words, the Talmud teaches that God looks at arrogant people and he cries over them. So you would say, what? God cries? God is not a physical being. How does he cry? Thank you for not asking that question. It means figuratively, God feels sad when he has given people so much to be proud about. He has given people so many gifts that they misuse those gifts by becoming arrogant and egotistic and push it in everybody's face. What would God rather get from people who have been given many gifts by him, many talents, many abilities, many capabilities? What would God rather have people behave in a way that is humble and not arrogant. Be grateful for all the gifts that God has given you and don't push it in everybody's face. So that's number 5. So it says there in number 5, if your child was haughty, if your child, imagine that, God willing, in a few years, if your child was haughty, arrogant, egotistic, would you cry over him or her? So we talked about that a couple of weeks ago in the 9th grade. Very interesting conversation. Very interesting, I must say. So we spoke about this idea that if you were a parent, would you cry over or feel sad about a son or a daughter that was reported in school by their teacher or principal that your child is haughty, your child is arrogant, your child is egotistic. So what would you do about that if you were the parent, if you heard those kind of reports? 2 very interesting outcomes came from that conversation. One was one of the girls in 9th grade said, well, if the teacher or the principal would say that, I would want specifics. What do you mean? Give me an example of my child's haughtiness or arrogance. In what way does it show itself? Tell me before I do anything or say anything to my child. Tell me specifics. And I thought that was a really, really good idea. Another person in the 9th grade said, well, very often when people are arrogant, haughty, egotistic, when things go to their head and they become very, very arrogant, sometimes it comes from a lack of, it comes from insecurity, not security. That's interesting. Sometimes when a child's self-worth or self-esteem is not healthy, they can overcompensate by being arrogant. Deep inside, they are so shaky and insecure about all kinds of things. So to compensate for that, on the outside, they become arrogant and egotistic and show how really great they are, where really deep inside, they don't feel great at all. So that's something for parents to help children with, teachers to help students with. And I thought that was an excellent comment made in the 9th grade in the last couple of weeks. One student in the 9th grade said, also a very excellent comment, if I was the parent hearing a report like that from my child's teacher's principal, I would have to ask myself, as a parent, where is my child learning that? Is that something I'm showing? Maybe I, as a parent, am too haughty, arrogant, conceited. Maybe I'm that way and the child is picking that up, thinking it's a good behavior. I thought that was a really interesting comment. Okay, so that's number 5, that God cries over people who are haughty. Why? Because he has given many people many gifts, and they've misused the gifts by becoming arrogant about them. I think it's a really interesting teaching. Really, really good. So here's number 6. Number 6 says, we should avoid excessive pride. Remember what I said in the beginning, pride about things that we do well, that things that we accomplish really nicely. Have all the pride in the world. Have it. You've done it. God has helped you achieve many wonderful things. Have that pride. Be proud of yourself about many different things. What we're talking about today is excessive, over the line, in people's faces. Can't contain it to yourself, and you become arrogant, haughty, conceited, huge ego, which, by the way, here's a tip-off, most people don't like that. Most people don't like the arrogance in people. Most people don't like conceited people. Some do, I guess, there's all kinds. But, so, number 6, we should avoid excessive pride in what we do and what we accomplish, and we should avoid having a high opinion of our own importance. Now, you want to have that high opinion and keep it to yourself? Good. Keep it to yourself. But don't shove it in everybody's face, because you're not going to be that likable if you do that. You know what I mean? So you want to have excessive pride, keep it to yourself, honey. But Otherwise, people are not enamored with people who are overly egotistic. So, number 6, we continue on that third line. In the Torah book of Devarim, it's the last book of the 5 books of the Torah. It teaches, you will ask Hashem, this is God predicting human behavior. You will ask Hashem to increase your blessings. Please, God, please help me to have more this, more that. Could you please make sure that I can get this and more of this and more of that? I really need it. I really want it. Please, please, please. God says, you will ask me to increase your blessings, and your heart will become haughty. In other words, okay, I'll give you those blessings, but then your heart is going to become egotistic, haughty, conceited, full of yourself, because I've given you these blessings. And here's an interesting prediction. God says, and you will forget me. That's an interesting reaction. You would think that the more you have, the more blessings you will give God about it. The more you have, the more grateful you will be. The more you'll thank God for all the things that he's given you. But God says, I know human nature, and you're going to go the other direction. Is that a musical group? Anyway, God says you will forget me because you will have too many blessings. And you may say in your heart, I'm continuing in number 6, you may say in your heart, oh, it is my strength and the might of my hand that has gotten me all these blessings. When you and I know it's not only what we've done and accomplished, but we've done it with the help of God. God continues in number 6, then you will remember Hashem, that it was he who gives you strength to make wealth. So that God, he created us, he knows our behavior. You're going to ask for many blessings. I may feel that you deserve it. You'll get those blessings. And then what? You'll be so overly blessed. You'll be so overly blessed that you'll forget who gave you these blessings. You'll become arrogant, egotistic, conceited, full of yourself. And you'll say, wow, look at all the things I've accomplished with no help from anybody, specifically no help from God. And that's not true, because God is somewhere in your blessings. Is he the first domino of your blessing? The last? Everybody's got different thoughts about it. But to say that our successes do not contain God anywhere, that's not what the Torah teaches. God is somewhere in all of the things that you have. And God says at the end of number 6, then you will remember me. In other words, once you really consider, here's my teaching on this, okay? I haven't seen this anywhere. This is my teaching. That as you become more and more arrogant and more egotistic and more shoving it in people's faces, the more people will dislike you and not tolerate you and have enough of you already with all your ego. When that happens, you'll start to reflect and you'll realize who the source of your blessing is. And then you will remember Hashem, the end of number 6, that it was he who gives you strength to make your wealth. So I like that. I like teaching number 6. I liked it so much, I included it in this handout. Let's take a look at number 7. This is from the Siddur. God humbles the haughty, and he lifts the humble. How do you like that? So God looks at all his creations. How many creations do we have in the world today? I think it's estimated somewhere between 8 to 10 billion people. Billion, not million. 8 to 10 billion people are in the world today. How do you like that? And we're just a small slice of that. 8 to 10 billion people in the world is number 7. God looks at the haughty people, the arrogant people, the egotistic people, and what does he do? He does things in their life to humble them. So, let's say you won the lottery and you won 1 million shekels. Wow, what do you do with that? Each of us would have a different opinion about what we would do with 1 million shekels. I would tell you what I would do with 1 million shekels. It would take too long. but I would spend it in a very nice way. Give some to tzedakah, good causes, good people. And then, well, each of us would have our own stories to what we would do with 1,000,000 shekels. But it says here in number 7, God looks at those to whom he has given so much, and instead of being humble about it, they're haughty, arrogant, conceited. He does things to humble them. So you have a lot of money. Don't be surprised if God works in your life to give you less money, to take away some of that money, to lose some of that money. Why? So that you will become more humble. And it also says that God takes the humble, who are very, very humble about the gifts that God has given them, and tries to raise them a little bit, not to become arrogant, but he blesses them with more and more, up to the point that if they become too arrogant, he'll take it away again. So it's a very interesting teaching. Number 7, God humbles the haughty and he lifts the humble. Further teaching, Hashem, this is what we say, I think in the Hallel prayer that we recite on Jewish holidays and Rosh Chodesh. Dear God, cast down the arrogant sinners and humble them quickly in our days. God, look at all those people who are not humble and knock them down a peg or two. Because a world filled with arrogant people, stuffy people, people with a huge ego, people who are conceited, it doesn't leave a lot of room in this world for God's teachings, for our humility. So we ask God to take care of these arrogant people and knock them down a peg or two. And then we have the teaching at the end of number 7, God humbles the haughty and lifts the lowly. He humbles the haughty and he lifts the lowly, those who are feeling so low about themselves, so insecure about themselves, so down on themselves all the time. God looks at them and says it's time to lift them up a little bit. It's time to raise them and make them feel good and better about themselves. And the better we feel about ourselves, the more we can recognize that God is the source of that goodness and blessing. And he's the source of all that wonderful achievement that we hope to accomplish. Top of the second page of the handout, interesting. A person who is haughty is like one who is worshiping other gods. A person who is haughty is like who is worshiping other gods. And I wrote in the parentheses, namely, him or herself. So, number 7, very interesting. At the end of this number 7, top of the second page, the haughtier we become, more arrogant, the more egotistic we become, we start serving somebody other than God. And who is that other somebody that we start serving or self-serving? Ourselves. We idolize ourselves because we think we're so great and mighty, powerful, famous, attractive, beautiful. We start to worship ourselves instead of worshiping the source of all those blessings. Very, very lovely teaching. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Interestingly enough, the Torah doesn't say you shall love yourself with all your heart and all your soul with all your might. So the more arrogant, haughty, conceited, egotistic we become, subtly we cross a line and we start serving ourselves instead of God. Very interesting teaching. Okay, we only have a few minutes left. Let's move to number 8. It says, even the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who had special communications with Hashem at certain times, like on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, in the holy temples, there was a special area, holy, sanctified, kadosh, that only one time a year, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, could enter on Yom Kippur, that area, have special communication with Hashem, And it was only on one day, very specific times during that one day, that the high priest could go into that very special area. So that's what I'm saying in number 8. The Kohen Gadol, who had special communications with Hashem at certain times, namely Yom Kippur, specific times only on that day, the Kohen Gadol had to be careful about being overly proud of his position. I'll be honest with you. If I lived in the days of the Holy Temple and I was a Kohen Gadol, I was a high priest, I had special clothing, I had a lot of respect from the nation. Everywhere I went, people would adore me, they would love me, they would see me as a possible connector between them and God by what I do, what I teach, the sacrifices and everything. If I was a Kohen Gadol, I could easily become egotistic. Easily. Take a look at chief rabbis of any country. The rabbi of the country. Chief rabbis of Israel, of France, of Britain, South Africa. Easily, you could become egotistic, arrogant, full of yourself. And I could easily imagine if I was a chief rabbi of anywhere, I could easily become egotistic and arrogant and haughty. So I can imagine the pressure that you've got to start being humble when you're in a position like that. So it says that the Kohen Gadol had to be careful about being overly proud of his position. Therefore, number 8, on the morning of Yom Kippur, this holiest day of the year, he, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was the one responsible to collect the ashes from the sacrifices of the night before. Imagine that. The high priest, in the morning, is going with a brush and a dustpan, bending over and cleaning up all the ashes from the sacrifices of the previous day. So you would say, why him? Didn't he have a staff? Didn't he have people that work with him, for him? The lowest person in the whole group couldn't go out with a dustpan and a broom and clean up the ashes? That doesn't sound like the job of the top person. That's not the job of the. That's the high priest. What kind of a job is that for a nice Jewish boy? So the question is, at the end of number 8, why him? Every other day it could be done first thing in the morning by a regular Kohen, but not the high priest. On Yom Kippur, holiest day of the year, the high priest does it. And the question is why? Why him? So the quick answer is, it's to remind him to be humble. Here you are. It would be like the president of Israel going to a classroom and picking up the pieces of paper and the trash and food all over the room. Is that his job? Is that below his dignity or her dignity? A king of a country would go and sweep the palace. Is that their job? And the answer is not their job. They have 12 other people that could do it. But it trains them to be humble. It trains them to be humble and not arrogant. It trains them to do the menial, simple jobs, the not attractive jobs, and it keeps them from being haughty. So this is one of the reasons why the Kohen Gadol sweeps up the ashes on the morning of Yom Kippur, to remind him to be humble, because he could easily be the other way. One of the questions I asked in the 9th grade class this week is, why only that morning? I would say the lesson is a good one. Every morning, let the high priest go every morning and clean the ashes. That seems to be not the teaching, or not a teaching I'm familiar with. Look at the last piece of number 8. The Torah warns the kings of Israel about excessive pride as a king. As a king, as the top of any pyramid, as the top banana, as they say, of any system, a king, a prime minister, a president, a queen, whatever, easily become arrogant and egotistic. Easily. the amount of attention paid to you, the amount of respect given you, the amount of deference that's paid to you, you can easily cross that line and become the most egotistic person in the world. And the ones who are good at being in those top jobs are the ones that can remain humble. The ones that can remain humble. Okay, last teaching of today, number 9. This comes from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. It's studied by millions of Jews. Often it's studied between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah every Shabbat afternoon, but I've taught Pirkei Avot many times to many different groups. So it's not just during those 6 months. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. You can't see this, but I'm looking on my bookshelf, and I have about 15 or 20 different books on Pirkei Avot, each with the author looking at different teachings and different aspects of different teachings. So I love it. I love Pirkei Avot, and we would be happy to teach it in the future, maybe next semester, who knows. Here's what it says, number 9, Pirkei Avot. Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, taught, there are 3 things to consider and think about, which will help you to avoid sins and will help to keep you from being arrogant. If you think about these 3 things, they will help you to avoid being arrogant, egotistic, haughty, full of yourself. So, wow. Hey, I'd like to know that. Wow. What are those 3 things? Tell me. So he's going to tell you. Know where you came from. And it says in parentheses, this needs an explanation, and boy, does it. Know where you're going. This needs an explanation too. And know before whom you stand to give an accounting of your life. So this needs an explanation. So these are the 3 things that Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, taught. These 3 things, if you think about them, study them, keep them in your mind, it will help you to avoid becoming arrogant and egotistic. What are they? Number 1, know where you came from. So if I ask that of a group of people, I'll say, what does it mean, know where you came from? They would say, like where you were born? Does that mean know where you came from? Know where you came from, does that mean like know the house you were raised in? Does that mean know the city you grew up in? Know where you came from? Does that mean I should remember my humble beginnings? Now I'm the CEO of a big company, but know where you came from? I should remember that I didn't always have this kind of wealth. By the way, when you listen to a lot of people give speeches after they get an award, and they could be very famous, very rich, popular, handsome, beautiful, whatever, very often they start their speech by saying, I didn't always have all this. My mother was my father was we didn't have much food on the table. We didn't have a lot of stuff growing up. So when you think about your early beginnings, now we're all kind of young in this classroom today, except the person on the video. We're all kind of youngish. So what are you talking about? I remember where I came from. As you get older and more mature, it's very valuable to remember what your beginnings were. As we become more and more successful, perhaps, and achieve more with God's help, it's important to remember where we came from. We didn't always have the good stuff we have now. We had humble beginnings. That's not what the Mishnah is talking. This teaching in Pirkei Avot. Know where you came from. You came from a smelly drop provided by a man that fertilized an egg of a woman. You came from a drop of sperm. That's your humble beginning. So now you got tons of money. You're beautiful. You're lovely, handsome. You started as a smelly drop. if you know what I mean. If not, Rabbi can explain it to you. Good luck. You started, that was your origin as a smelly drop that had to fertilize an egg, which created you eventually, ultimately. So that's know where you came from. Your beginning was that little smelly thing. Then it says, know where you're going. Does that mean like you should make plans in your life? Absolutely. Know where you're going. I should be focused. Is that what it means? Could mean that. What it means in this teaching is know where you're going. Everybody ends up in the same place, namely buried in the ground. So our beginning is a smelly human male drop of sperm. Our very end is buried in the ground. So you want to be arrogant? You want to be prideful? You want to be egotistic? If you remember, your beginning is a little drop, and your end is where everybody ends up, pretty much. You've lived your life, and you're buried in the ground. If you just think of those two things, it could help you to not become arrogant or egotistic or conceited or self-serving or let things go to your head and you push it in front of everybody's face and eventually they'll all dislike you, or most people will. So that's the two out of the three ingredients. Know where you came from, little tiny drop, smelly drop. Know where you're going. You're going to be buried like everybody else, no matter how conceited you are, no matter how fame and fortune and riches and good looks and all that and awards. We're all going to the same place, dear friends. We all started in the same way. We're all going to the same place. And third ingredient, know before whom you stand to give an accounting. Which means at the end of our life, we all stand as spiritual beings before Hashem, and he will say, okay, Bubala, tell me what you accomplished in the years that I gave you. What did you do with what you were given? And that's the accounting that we give God at the end of our lives. What did you do with what you were given? Very important question. So that's number 9. So, dear friends, I would like to say I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. It was my pleasure to put this on video. Happy to hear any reactions on WhatsApp. If you have any questions, God willing, I'll be in school tomorrow with the 11th and 12th grade, but I can be there early in the teacher's room upstairs. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, etc., be very, very happy to hear them. I hope you feel like you learned something today. I wish you a wonderful day, safe travels home, and God willing, we'll see you very, very soon. Shalom, everybody. Be well.